Good point. Ms. Bosler or Ms. Thompson?
Thank you. The department has made quite a bit of progress in this area. Recently, they have appointed a special program manager for fish passages, and there are 600 fish passages total that are within Caltrans right-of-way. They have remediated 31 fish passage barriers. They have 27 that are currently in the project development process for remediation. Of the 36 that were specifically identified by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, they have 9 that are currently in project development, an additional 3 that are in the planning stages, and 4 that are in the environmental process. And those are all in addition to the 27 that are not on the 36 priority list. And additionally, they are inspecting the remaining culverts that are associated with the priority projects, and they'll have those inspections completed by June 30th of this fiscal year. I would also note that they are currently funding 32.5 positions at various environmental agencies at both the state and federal level to help with the streamlining the permit process, and they'll be adding 2 additional positions in the 15-16 year to help with that process. And that's something that we're committed to working on as an administration. We feel like the permit process is still fairly onerous and is causing some of the delay for Caltrans. And that's something that needs to be worked on definitely as part of an interagency process. But we don't feel that there needs to be a specific earmark for this purpose.
Mr. Hacker, any response to all that?
I would just point out that the existing statute that we're referring to requires a couple of things of Caltrans. One, that they construct new roadway projects in a manner that doesn't create a new barrier, and 2, that they actively seek out and remediate existing barriers. And to this point, the 31 fish passage barriers that they have already remediated, they've remediated as part of an existing roadway project. So when they go out to do a maintenance project or a pavement project or what have you, if there's a fish passage on that project, they remediate it, but if there's not, then they don't. So they have not been going out and actively seeking them out for remediation.
Okay, thank you. Senator Laura.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the assembly version with the modification that it is a one-time appropriation.
Very good. Clarify that it is one time. We do have a motion for the assembly version. 2-1? 2-1 on the Senate side. 2-1 on the assembly side. Our next item is the Tower Bridge relinquishment, page 4. And that is an assembly proposal. Mr. Hacker.
So the Assembly approved 2 things related to this item. The first was budget bill language authorizing an additional appropriation of up to $15 million in SHA funds to fund improvements and maintenance on the Tower Bridge to bring it up to what's known as a state of good repair. And 2, they adopted placeholder trailer bill language authorizing the California Transportation Commission to relinquish Tower Bridge to the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento. And we would recommend going with the Senate version on this one. While the relinquishment of Tower Bridge is consistent with past practices and seems reasonable, we would note that these relinquishments typically go through the policy process rather than the budget process, and we believe that's the right place to put this. Additionally, putting it through the policy process would allow Caltrans time to develop a more thorough and more accurate assessment of the amount of maintenance actually required on Tower Bridge and to return with a more detailed funding request.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, this was not part of our budget proposal, and we do think that the assembly action is premature. The city, the 2 cities are continuing to work on putting the local funding in place for this project, and we don't think we need any additional language, that if they do come to the state with a plan for wanting to take over this bridge, that we could work with them within our existing authorities. Also, we would note that cap and trade is available, and we think that that may be a viable funding source for some of what they're trying to do.
I have a note here, Mr. Hacker, that though the bridge is in fairly good condition, there are $8.6 million in improvements programmed over the next 5 years. Can you confirm that?
We can follow up with you on that.
All right. And do we have any history of maintenance costs to the state in recent years on this bridge?
Specific to Tower Bridge, we can follow up with you on that as well.
Okay. The reason I ask these questions is if it's true we've got $8.6 million, program for the next 5 years, and I think we've probably spent at least that much in recent years, that 15 million to relinquish it and let the locals have the responsibility probably is the fiscally wise thing to do, besides that it's their request that they would have this taken care of for them. But I also understand that though existing law only allows the bridge to be relinquished to one entity, and they'd like to share this with Sacramento and Sacramento. And that's the need for the change?
Perhaps I could provide some clarification. There's currently $8.6 million in the current SHOP plan, which is the 5-year maintenance plan for highway repairs that the state puts together. And there's currently $8.6 million set aside in the, I believe it's the 17-18 fiscal year, to do some repairs to what is called the fenders of the bridge. So that's a specific repair project that they would complete in that year. We've historically spent approximately $400,000 in maintenance on the bridge as an average over the last several years. So that, that would be the amount that we spent. In terms of the relinquishment itself, this $15 million right now, the way that it has been proposed, is not tied directly to the relinquishment of the bridge, meaning that the project would receive the $15 million but not be required to essentially take the bridge after they receive the $15 million. And there is right now specific statute in place that allows specifically for the relinquishment of State Route 275. So there's no further, and you're correct in that right now relinquishments can only go to one entity or the other, but we would be able to relinquish it to one entity or the other with existing statute. If we wanted it to be shared between two entities, if that was the desire of the locals, then we would need clarifying statute. But normally the relinquishment process is a negotiation that takes place between the state and the locals. And the National Bridge Index is how the bridge health is measured at the federal level, and this bridge is considered to be between fair and good condition.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Assemblywoman.
I think one of the things that, and I think it has been pointed out that the Sacramento and West Sac folks have come together asking to basically to improve the bridge for this transportation that they're going to develop from West Sac into Sacramento to connect all the areas and the agencies together. The understanding on our part would be that we would not relinquish the funds without in exchange for their taking over the bridge and the maintenance of the bridge, that we would not just give them $15 million for the repair that they would need in order to do the rails and what have you, but that would be a condition of them assuming responsibility for the bridge, so that we would no longer have to deal with the maintenance costs of the bridge that we have right now, and that's been quite an ongoing cost to maintain the bridge. And in the past, the cities have never had an interest in maintaining the bridge and assuming responsibility for it. So since they want the bridge, and they need the bridge, and they need the ability to create transportation across the bridge with this new rail system that they're hoping to put in place, that they're still working on, that would be a condition, that we would do the $15 million to help with the renovation of the bridge for the transportation purposes, but they would have to take responsibility for the bridge. Now, it's not just giving them a bridge without, without some understanding that that would be it, that they would have to take responsibility for the maintenance of the bridge from this day forward.
And I should point out, thank you, Assemblywoman, that the budget bill language that the Assembly is proposing is up to 15 million,
Right.
not 15 million necessarily, and so that would be the negotiation between Caltrans and the two cities.
Right.
And Mr. Hacker, there'd be no problem with us clarifying, as Assemblywoman Weber just stated, that this would be with the condition that they would take responsibility for the bridge.
Yeah.
That's all quite doable.
That's correct, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Hold on.
Senator Laura.
You may do it.
Mr. Chair, actually, I'm feeling a little generous after lunch, so I'd like to move the Assembly version.
Who fed you?
So we do have a motion for the Assembly version, and again, to underscore that this would be with an appropriation up to $15 million to be negotiated, and with the stipulation that the responsibility going forward for the bridge would be between the two cities, for the two cities.
I would
Senator
just
Nielsen?
add to the dialogue here that the voters of Sacramento have already said no to this idea. So there's no big thirsting of local interest here. They've already had a vote on it.
To a specific taxing proposal that was on the ballot,
We have another one.
but not to the broader question. Right, so we do have a motion before us. Assemblyman Bloom.
Well, I wouldn't characterize it, it was a loss because it was required a two-thirds majority, but a majority of the people voting supported the project,
And,
just to clarify.
right, and I
I
think
think
the
55%.
proponents of the measure have some
Other alternative.
alternatives that they're going to be putting forward.
Mr. Chairman, I've just been corrected. It's 48% is what.
48%, all right, a near majority.
So was that, my number was off?
48% supported, and what was the number opposed? Well,
High-level math, you guys. It's late in the day.
that's why I rely on staff for the numbers.
On the Senate side, it would be 2-1. On the Assembly side, 2-1. Our next item is the Fresno County Proposition 42, Maintenance of Effort. Mr. Hacker, this is a Senate proposal. Assembly, yeah.
Assembly proposal. The Assembly approved trailer bill language to permanently eliminate the Proposition 42 maintenance of effort requirement for Fresno County, which is worth about $5.6 million to Fresno. And the maintenance of effort is simply a requirement that local governments continue to spend their own funds on street repair at historical levels in order to be eligible for state funds related to Prop 42. We would note that in last year's budget package, the legislature extended the suspension of this maintenance of effort requirement through 2020. And because of this, and because this suspension is in place through 2020, we would recommend going with the Senate version, which did not include this elimination, since no legislative action is required at this time.
We talked about, Mike, it's not on. We had briefly talked about this in our own meetings. We know that last year we agreed to hold off on the payment because the county was going to do indigent care, and they did do indigent care. Our concern, at least my concern, and I think that shared it with my colleagues in our meeting, was that they want to be relieved from payment at all. So that's somewhat of a concern, depending on it. But we were also concerned that if we did not ask them to pay back the money, then they would give up the indigent care, because it was kind of arm twisting to get them to do indigent care last year. And so our concern is that while we might be somewhat agreeable to it if they maintain indigent care, and when indigent care went away, then they'd have to pay us our money. So, you know, that was one of the concerns, because our relieving of them of this responsibility was because they were going to take that money and do indigent care. And then when we thought of giving them the money, they immediately said, well, we'll take the money, take the relief, but we won't do indigent care. And then when we say, well, we're not going to give you the money, then they said, okay, well, we'll do indigent care. So they did indigent care, and so they phased it out. Our concern is that if we relieve them of the responsibility of having to pay us back, they may then eventually drop the indigent care. So I guess if there's some way we could tie this responsibility together, otherwise every other county has paid us, and so they should too. So that's the concern. So I guess we could go with the Senate version of this. What do you think? I don't know.
Mr. Hacker,
Hold it on, we're gonna hold it on.
SB 524, which was Senator Cogdell's bill, which granted Fresno County this 5-year extension, the extension's good to 2020. So if we do nothing now,
It's good to 2020.
it's good to 2020. So
That's
that
correct.
was the thought behind the Senate position, which was no action.
It's good to 2020.
There's no rush at all to take action.
Sounds good.
So we see what they do over the next few years.
Okay.
Ms. Bosler, do you want to weigh in on this? There's no state cost in this.
No, this was not part of our budget proposal, and
Right.
we don't have a.
Okay.
You gonna move the Senate version?
Talk among yourselves.
Might as well. They got to 2020 to pay it back, or to change it. You didn't notice? Okay, we'll hold it open,
I understand.
but we'll get back to
All
it.
right.
Probably agree to it. Want to notify a member.
Of course. Page 6, or page 49, is Proposition 42 loans. Assembly version proposal, Mr. Hacker. Thank you.
This is an Assembly proposal, and the Assembly adopted placeholder trailer bill language to reflect the remaining $879 million of pre-Proposition 42 transportation borrowing as general fund, special fund loans, which currently are not tracked as such by the administration. And we would recommend going with the Assembly proposal on this item as considering these funds, or considering this borrowing special fund loans for the purposes of Proposition 2 would maximize the legislature's flexibility.
It certainly would, and that's what Prop 2 is there for. We're going to hear from Ms. Bosler.
Yeah, this was not part of our proposal, and we would just note that we have not been tracking these loans as general fund payables under Proposition 2, but would continue to discuss this issue further as we put together a larger transportation package.
And any particular reason why this was not considered part of the wall of debt?
They were to be repaid with tribal gaming revenues, which were a separate funding source that was not going into the general fund. We have lots of different arrangements with different gaming tribes on how revenues flow to the state, and this was how some of those compacts were structured, was to fund transportation directly.
And if we were to take the Assembly action, and if these loans were eligible for Prop 2 funds, any downside?
It's something that I need to take back and discuss further.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, we concur with the LAO and recommend the Assembly version.
Thank you, Senator Lara. So we do have a motion for Assembly version. 3-0 on the Senate side, 3-0 on the Assembly side. Another Assembly proposal, Mr. Hacker.
The Assembly adopted trailer bill language requiring Caltrans by April 1st of 2016 to report to the legislature on potential impacts on safety, greenhouse gas reductions, improve service level, and reduce operating costs of developing grade separations at key intersections on the intercity rail network, and as well as possibly on the electrification of all or parts of the state's intercity rail system.
I understand there might be...
I understand that the finance has a compromise on this.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. We have a compromise trailer bill language that would reduce the scope of the study to limit it to grade separations that and define the key intersections that basically, as the Federal Railroad Administration has identified a number of high-risk safety intersections that are located throughout the country, but we would propose limiting the study to those that meet a particular safety coefficient.
Sounds like a good idea.
Sounds good.
All right.
Move the compromise.
Any comments from the committee? We have a compromise motion, 3-0 Senate, 3-0 Assembly. Yes, we're on a roll. Page 8. Moving to the Board of Pilot Commissioners, pilot fatigue study. Yes, Assemblyman.
Can I just return to that last item for a moment? Because, it seems to me we may be losing an opportunity here if, even if we're restricting it to the high-risk intersections, we still should take a look at and study what that means for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and improved service levels. So at least we know from that experience what the potential outcomes are if we want to go further in the future.
Oh, absolutely. That's still included in the study. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. pilot fatigue study. I think this came out of the Assembly with thoughts of the Casco Busan tragedy in San Francisco Bay. Ms. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Assembly approved $450,000 for the Board of Pilot Commissioners to fund a pilot fatigue study. This study was required by existing law, and so we would recommend the Assembly version on this one. The Senate didn't fund the study, but the legislature previously approved doing the study and had that as a legislative priority. And so we would recommend the Assembly version on this.
And the $450,000 would come from the Pilot Commissioners Special Fund.
Correct.
And they pay into this fund? Is that like an insurance policy for themselves?
The money, revenues into the fund are from fees charged on the issuances of licenses and permits. So the Board of Pilot Commissioners licenses the 60 bar pilots that pilot large cargo ships in and out of the San Francisco Bay Area and
So it's
Delta.
to assist them in their own needs and necessities?
Correct.
Yeah.
It comes from their fund.
Ms. Bosler.
Yeah, so there may be a little bit of disagreement here, because we think the study is actually well underway and has actually, the contract's already been awarded to San Jose State in the amount of $350,000. So we're not sure that additional monies are needed at this time, so we support the Senate version.
First we've heard of it.
So the study's underway, and
think.
you believe that all funding for it has been identified or not?
I believe there's a certain portion that will be funded out of their 15-16 budget as well, but that's already planned for and accounted for in their current budget without an augmentation.
Ms. Peters?
We had not been informed that a study was underway already. Our understanding is that it had been required, but there was no funding set aside, but we're happy to follow up with the administration and figure out what the status of this one is and whether or not it's fully funded.
Ms. Thompson, you had something to add? No, okay. So we should probably get that clarification then if you
Right.
could.
Good.
Keep it open. California Highway Patrol Distracted Driver Program on page 9. Again, Assembly proposal. Ms. Peters.
The Assembly allocated $500,000 from the motor vehicle account to the Highway Patrol and budget bill language directing CHP to study and plan for the implementation of a program to educate teen drivers on distracted driving. We would note that the Office of Traffic Safety, which has a budget of about $100 million annually in federal funds, already does this type of work and has educational campaigns that they fund on distracted driving, as well as, targeting specific populations such as teen drivers. So we would recommend the Senate version on this one.
So this is not a new item. In fact, we put $700,000 into our budget last year, which the governor vetoed. But the governor then also had staff review the CHP's curriculum specific to distracted drivers, and I'm told that the curriculum and videos have since been updated, which you've just said. It's accurate.
Yes, that's correct. The Transportation Agency has been working with CHP and DMV. They're in the process of a 3-phase, essentially, approach to this program. And they've already rolled out phase 1, which is, as you mentioned, a review of the existing curriculum. CHP is also holding classes for teen drivers in their local offices. They held over 1,000 classes last year. They're planning on holding over 1,000 classes next year. Phase 2 and 3 of this program are currently in development at the agency. They're planning on rolling out phase 2 shortly, followed by phase 3.
And since the governor did veto the $700,000 last year, this is coming out of some existing budget?
It is coming out of their existing resources, yes.
And there doesn't seem to be any problem
No,
with that.
correct.
And Ms. Peters, is this an appropriate use of the motor vehicle account?
In terms of an allowable use or in terms of the fund balance of the motor
Eligible
vehicle account?
use.
Off the top of my head, I think the MVA funding can be used, generally for the, sort of operation and enforcement of driving, and so I don't see why it wouldn't be an eligible use, but if you have a specific concern, we're happy to look into it. But off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of a reason why not. I think we've raised some issues regarding just the overall fund balance of the MVA, but in terms of an eligible use, if you have a specific concern, we can look into it, but I'm
You're not convinced?
Well, I'm not sure, because with regards to those who came to us, I'm not really sure if this is, if 500,000 is I assume it's in addition to what they're currently getting, so they must feel at some point that they don't have enough funding to fully implement a statewide program. I'm not really sure. We were informed that they needed this to implement the program for whatever reason, so we probably need to get more information about the current program they have, whether or not there is a shortfall, whether or not they're meeting the needs of those that are driving, whether or not there's an increase in distracted drivers and there's a need for an initiative or a more aggressive program. I'm not really sure.
Assemblywoman, and just in the context of our situation here, and
Right.
if you could get back to us with regard to the eligibility, that'd be fine, but that's not really germane to our points here, that we put $700,000 into last year's budget, the governor vetoed it.
Right.
The governor took actions,
probably
curricula and videos were updated, there were classes ongoing.
Okay.
Would
How much?
imagine if we put $500,000 in, we know what was going to happen to it.
Yeah, okay.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, the administration didn't ask for this money, correct?
No,
No.
CHP did.
Okay, well,
At least that's my understanding. The Officers Association asked for the funding, not CHP. The Officers Association asked for the funding in our Public Safety Committee. So,
Yeah, we have some significant issues with the fund balance in the MVA, things that we will need to address in the coming year. There's also increased pressures that have not been accounted for currently, based on employee contracts that will need to be updated and renegotiated that aren't even accounted in the current balance and will be a continued problem and pressure going forward. So we would be reluctant to add any additional pressures to this fund.
we'll go with the Senate version.
Okay, so we do have a motion for the Senate. Is that 3-0 on the Senate side, 3-0 on the Assembly side? Sticking with the CHP, site identification of replacement field offices. This is the governor's proposal.
Hello, Sally Lucanville, Department of Finance. So the governor's budget included a $1 million appropriation for CHP for statewide planning and site identification studies. These funds allow DGS on behalf of the California Highway Patrol to research various communities and sites around the state for potential and suitable sites for CHP replacement facilities. The appropriation also included provisional language allowing finance to augment the appropriation up to $2 million to secure purchase options in the event that a critical site is identified and there are no alternatives. The Senate voted to modify that provisional language to require a reporting in January of 2016 to the legislature and before notification to the legislature on a purchase option that might be exercised.
And you're okay with that modification?
Yes, we are.
All right.
Yeah, we'll accept the Senate version.
Sounds like we're all on the same page here. So 3-0 Senate, 3-0 Assembly. We've got a body camera pilot program coming from the Assembly. Ms. Peters.
The Assembly augmented the Highway Patrol's expenditure authority by $2 million in motor vehicle account funding in order to fund a pilot program to test the use of body cameras for CHP officers. The action also included budget bill language specifying that any unused funds at the end of the budget year would revert to the MVA. We think that to the extent that the legislature is interested in having body cameras for CHP, that doing a pilot program is the right way to go in order to test this technology and determine its cost effectiveness and how you would want it used. That being said, we would note that the motor vehicle account is projected to become insolvent in the coming years, and so you're going to want to weigh your priorities for spending from the motor vehicle account, this with your other priorities.
Thank you, Ms. Peters. I was about to say that if Finance was concerned about a $500,000 hit on the motor vehicle account, I'm sure you have a very firm opinion on $2 million, but go right ahead, Ms. Bosler.
Yes, we didn't have a proposal in this area in our budget. Would just note that the MVA balance is a continued and ongoing concern that we have. I do believe that $2 million could deploy about 200 cameras. That's about the size of the pilot project that would be funded with this amount of money.
Right. And I think, Ms. Peters, you're right. There are about 6 bills in the legislature right now on the subject of body cameras, and there are a lot of policy details. I know my colleague to my right has done her very best to get into the specifics of how the cameras would be used, under what protocols and standards, the safeguarding of the recordings, the privacy issues. There's a lot to look at. And is there detail in the Assembly proposal of that nature?
So we think that if you wanted to approve a pilot program, you may want to specify some additional details. We haven't seen a lot of the specifics of what the pilot that the Assembly is proposing would look like, that we haven't had the chance to review that yet. But there's things that you may want to specify if you did a pilot in terms of evaluating the usefulness of it, privacy issues, and the cost of storing the footage is one of the largest costs, and sort of evaluating what the different ways are to store the data, as well as how to deploy the cameras. So there's a lot of things that you would want to consider, and you may want to just specify some of those key elements to ensure that the pilot really gets the results the legislature is looking for.
And if we could find $2 million in the motor vehicle fund.
Yeah, if we can find all that being one. I think our sub-chair particularly was interested in this project, and we can look into it at some point. We'd even talked about recently reducing it down to $1 million. The concern was doing it in terms of doing the project with the CHP is because the CHP often deals with a wide area in terms of situations where you have remote areas as well as urban areas, and as it seems as if everyone is rushing into the body camera era, that we don't always have a lot of information about the various types of cameras that work best in different areas, that give you the kind of image that you want if you're in a remote area versus some other area, not familiar with all of those pieces, as well as a number of the policy issues we've been discussing, whether or not, and we were looking at that in terms of if we did a pilot, we would put some stipulations on it so we can learn more than just how much do the cameras cost and how often should, and those kinds of things, and how to store the information, but what are some of the best practices and policies that basically give you the best results, so you could have a various scenarios, and then figure out what policy ought to exist statewide, if so, and in certain areas with regards to body cameras. So that was our general thinking. We're more than willing to hold this over obviously, and to see what materializes, in terms of putting together a pilot program. I thought it would have been something to put into our other funds that we talked about, but the $40 million, but that deals with our local police and not necessarily with our CHP. Yeah.
Ms. Bosler, not a part of your plan.
I think I've already spoken to it, but yeah, it was not part of our plan, but
Okay.
understand the issue and that there's a significant amount of interest in looking at
Senator Nielsen.
how to refine this policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, there's an old saying, that don't get the cart ahead of the horse. Well, this is getting the camera ahead of the horse. This is a major policy consideration. It may have merit, but the conditions, and the protocols are extraordinarily important. And part of them is who has access to it under what circumstances as well. We do not want to have these cameras immediately go out in the evening news, and we're trying the whole case in the public venue. There's many implications that I think should be dealt with in our legislative process first. Then we do the pilot.
Senator, I happen to be in full agreement with you, but out of deference to the Vice Chair of the committee, we're going to hold this open. And that completes transportation. Good work, committee and full team here. So we are concluding our work today. We'll reconvene tomorrow, Friday at 10 a.m. take up resources, and before the day is out, we will complete resources, which means the entirety of our first reading. And we'll get back to committee members and to Finance and LEO as soon as possible to see when we'll be going back to close out all these issues. No sooner than Sunday, but hopefully no sooner than Monday. Thank you all, and there will be reconciliation after we leave and let you get to your business. We're adjourned.